Our friends over at FanDuel has set the over-under at 7.5 games for the Jacksonville Jaguars. We'll discuss that here on Locked On Jaguars.
You are Locked On Jaguars, your daily Jacksonville Jaguars podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
It is your team every day here on Locked On Jaguars. We thank you for making us your first listen. Appreciate you taking your time each and every day to join us here for the podcast, whether you watch it or listen to it. I am very, very grateful for you taking time to do that with us, and make sure you do it wherever we get your podcast. Make sure you tap in to the Locked On Jaguars podcast. Here's what we're going to discuss today. What needs to happen for the Jaguars to exceed the 7.5 games that FanDuel has set as the over-under for their win total? I think they're likely to go over 8 wins. So I'll tell you, I just told you I think they're going to go over it, and then I'm going to tell you how. But first, we're going to discuss the fact that FanDuel has set the win total over-under at 7.5 games for the Jacksonville Jaguars. Good news is the highest win total they have for anybody is 11.5. Okay, and that's a couple of teams, or a few teams. Baltimore is 1, and Kansas City and Philly are the other 2 that I've been able to find. 9.5 for a lot of other teams, including the Houston Texans. Washington is at 9.5. So don't be alarmed. Don't think that they think that this team is going 8-9 or 7-10. Don't be alarmed by those totals, because last year there were 3 teams that won 14 or more games. Well, 4 if you include Philly. So, I mean, that thing could go either way, man. It's win totals, and the way that this works is they're trying to make you, decide how good you think these teams are going to be. So if you do that, make sure you go look at FanDuel. I'll go ahead and go through the division right now. Jacksonville is at 7.5. Indy's at 7.5. Houston is at 9.5. Let me see where those little raggedy Titans are. The Titans are 5.5. So basically, they're saying it's going to be a close division, and that's where it is. Now, me personally, Tony Wiggins, I'm going to tell you right now, I'm going on FanDuel, and I'm saying they're going over that. I would have gone over if they said 8.5, but 7.5 is a good number with the way that these things work. I'll tell you in the second segment why I think they're going to go over, but I'd like to park right here for a minute. We look at schedules sometimes and we go, well, this is going to be tough. And obviously that's based on last year, right? And we all know that that's the only metric that we have to think of how good a team is going to be is the last time we saw them. Last time we saw Washington, they were in the NFC Championship game. But if you go back to early in the season or to the beginning of the season, the offseason, Washington, who had just been sold, was basically a dumpster fire. And nobody would have, you would probably made a lot of money last year if you picked them to go to the NFC Championship game and to win as many games that they did. So odds are odds. There are a lot of intangibles that go into a team being better this year than they are last year. And for the Jaguars, that's where I really want to focus, because I expect, and they obviously expect, that the Jacksonville Jaguars will improve on their record last year. Now, they also have the New England Patriots at 7.5, and the Patriots were one of the worst teams in the league this past season. So I think there's some projection with teams, especially teams that change coaches, that everything's going to be looking up. For instance, if you go on FanDuel and you look at all of the coaches that they have as the favorites to be coaches, coach of the year candidates, all of them are coaches mainly. Liam Cohen's there. Liam Cohen's in there. Mike Vrabel's in there. If they weren't new additions or new coaches, they are at the very least teams that are bad, like Carolina. Dave Canales is in. They expect that there's so much more blue sky for those teams because they're picking high in the draft. Most of them had a bunch of salary cap money, with the exception of Seattle. But that's the way that this always works. It always works where you go where the blue sky is. I think it's very, very interesting that 7.5 is the number. And a lot of Jaguar fans that have hit me up this morning on socials, they aren't angry one bit at that. They aren't angry at one bit that the Jaguars number is 7.5. And a lot of people say that's a good number. And I think that that's a testament to the fact that most people believe that the Jaguars are going to improve, even if it's slightly improved. And one of the reasons for that is, well, wholesale changes. And wholesale changes will do that. It is something that this team needed for a long, long time. And there's a difference. And you can't look at the Jaguars now and say, okay, based on what we saw last year, we think they're going to do that same thing, or maybe be a little bit better than that. No, because all of that stuff is gone. All of the leadership, the coaches, the not knowing a whole bunch of stuff until people left. A lot of guys didn't like the coaches that were coaching them last year and the last couple of years, particularly Doug Peterson, Ryan Nielsen. I knew about one of them. I didn't know about the other one until the season ended. And, of course, Trent Baalke. I hope what this shows everyone, without even knowing whether this group with Gladstone and Baselli and, of course, Liam Cohen, without even knowing how they're going to actually do, I hope this finally shows when people really, not this particular thing today, but the feeling that people have over the organization. It matches and it mirrors the sentiment that a lot of people in the media around here tried to tell people for a long time that was going on. And all the national people, most of the national people, they wanted to point at a player. And I don't have a problem with it pointing at Trevor because he's the quarterback. And quarterbacks sometimes get too much blame and they also get too much credit when the team does well. But I said it over and over again. We all did, not just me. There were other people. Something was missing. Something was wrong. Even with people who have been, and I know this had to be killing Tony, because like my personal interaction with Trent Baalke was always professional, right? And I can only imagine if you're in the building with him every day, and one, you have to be professional. But the other part of it is sometimes we confuse the human aspect with being able to just tell somebody the truth about whether they're good or not, right? And it's not about just talent. This is about leadership. This is about trust. This is about having, I'm going to use the word, a culture or an environment that people want to play in, that people want to live in, that people feel that they're growing in, right? Not even individually, but collectively. So now we see that there was a lot of things missing. And a lot of what you see now is a little bit of the honeymoon with the Jaguars, but there's also, there's been an intent. If you ever wondered what Shad or anybody else thought about how things, no matter when they found out, but how things were going and why things were that way, if you'll notice, there's been this big shift towards alignment, not only from the head coach, but the assistants to the coaches, to the quality control folks, all the way up top to Shad Khan. And you see this new form of doing something differently, because what do we always say? I think the first person I ever heard say this was Wayne Weaver. He said doing same thing over and over again and expecting a different result is the definition of insanity. And too many times the Jaguars did the same thing, and Shad Khan was the one doing it. It just looked differently, but he was doing the same things. I think they've done a lot. Now they just got to get to the winning, and 7.5 doesn't seem like as bad of a number when you look at the overall numbers from everyone. It's not a bad number at all. There's a lot of teams that seem like they're pretty good that have a 7.5 over under. So that's what the Jaguars have. Very interesting stuff over at FanDuel. Make sure you go over there. They got all kinds of stuff over there, man. Rookie of the year. They got odds for everything. Make sure you check that out. All right, we'll get to more, and I'll tell you why I think they're likely to go way over 8 games. Not way over. Let me pause. Way over is 2. I think this is a 10-win team easily, and it could be more. But my floor is 10 wins for this team. I'll get into that in just a second here on Locked On Jaguars. Today's show is sponsored and brought to you by FanDuel. That's right. FanDuel, man, is where it is at right now because Final Four is coming. And it has been fun watching March Madness. But now you got all number one seeds, man. And right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. That's $200 extra bucks to use on everything from buzzer beaters to Cinderella stories and even who's cutting down the nets. I got my eye on all of them, man. I think it's going to be Florida and Duke in the final. And I'll hold back and tell you who I think is going to win. But make sure you go on over to FanDuel and take advantage of the fact that you can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. So visit FanDuel.com and get in on the college hoops action all Final Four long. All right, moving along here on Locked On Jaguars, where it's your team every day, talking about the fact that FanDuel has set the Jags win total in Vegas to be 7.5 games. I actually think they're going to go over that. I'm not going to make a record prediction, but I got a feeling I got a feeling last year I went overboard. I said it's 13 wins, but I ain't going to do that this year. And I'm not going to actually set my own number. I got to wait until the draft, wait to training camp, see what's going on, see how quickly guys are picking things up. I mainly want to see how the offensive line functions before I start, because that's the key to me. I think the offensive line has to function, and I think they have to remain very, very healthy in the secondary in order for me to make some kind of prediction. But right now, I just think about, without attaching too much to last year, I think the Jaguars, they were one score away in a bunch of games. I think they lost more one-score games than anybody in the league. And I'm not going to use that because I basically said that what happens year to year doesn't matter, especially when you change coaches. But I will say this: if these coaches are better, and I think they are, and if the GM is better with the communication and with getting in line so that they aren't getting things that the coach doesn't necessarily want, and all of these things, and they're getting the most out of each and every part of the whole operation, well, I think they have the talent level. If you have the talent level to participate and be involved into games into the fourth quarter, then if you put the proper leadership in and you get the players to believe, that's why I think this team has a great chance to improve on that, their record last year. Now, I know it doesn't seem like that's that big of a deal because they were awful, right? I mean, they were one of the worst teams in the league. They're picking fifth in the draft for a reason. There are some things that have to happen, and I'm going to make sure I get to that in seg 3, but some things that have seen. Why do I believe that they're good enough right now? One, I think they're going to use Trevor properly. Two, I think they've started the insulation process of protecting him by getting 4 linemen, at least 2 starters in free agency, and then getting 2 reserves that are probably better than some people that have started here on this team over the years, at least in the capacity of filling in for folks. Being very, very intentional about what they have done at wide receiver, and I expect them to do more. Loving the fact that they want speed. They want guys that can win one-on-one. And they aren't going for dudes, believe it or not, that are deficient in an area. Like, if you're slow, I don't think you're going to be able to play here. And if you're overly small, I don't think you can be able to play here. It's odd that Trent would get slow guys, big slow guys, and small, fast guys sometimes when he was procuring talent at the wide receiver position. But they just never really had guys that developed. The Jaguars did. You could say Brian Thomas Jr., but he was a first overall pick, right? They haven't really had players, man, that were better than their talent suggested that they would be, actually play better than their talent suggests. So they had a double whammy of a problem. And the problem is outside of the early choices, they didn't draft really, really well, especially on day 3. And then they didn't develop and extract really, really well. You can say that they did some development with Trayvon, even though most of that is Trayvon and what he does in the offseason. You definitely could say they had an impact on Brenton Strange. And I believe, that may have led to, Coach Angulo being retained, one of the only coaches who was retained from the previous staff, Richard Angulo. And Richard Angulo knows about it. He knows what it is. He worked in Baltimore for a number of years, played tight end. He also understands blocking because he was, assistant offensive line coach. So to me, he's done a really, really good job, even with Evan Ingram, who isn't here anymore. And the other tight end that they had here, who got a pretty big deal from the 49ers, a bigger deal than the Jaguars gave the two dudes that they replaced him with. So I think that's the part of it where they have done well. I don't think that they've done well with the defensive backs in terms of the development. But a lot of that has to do with, look, Deshae Townsend knows what he's doing. Deshae Townsend right now I think he's the pass game coordinator. I know he's the defensive back coach up in Detroit. And it seems like to me he does a hell of a job. And he probably could have done it here. But that's why things have to really line up and really, really have to jive. If you go back now to 2 years ago when they, an off season that happened about not even 2 years ago, when they fired all of the coaches last off season. It was just last year when they got rid of the defensive staff. Think back to that. Maybe wholesale changes needed to happen. Like, you can't leave the defensive staff and then fire the coach, the head coach, and the offensive staff and the GM. But when someone heard somebody say you're firing all the help, it turned out to be right, because I think the defensive coaches who were let go in Jacksonville were probably better options than the offensive coaches who remained. The team got worse when they brought in an entire new defensive staff. The team got worse offensively and defensively. So Mike Caldwell wasn't as bad as we thought. Deshae wasn't as bad as we thought. And a bunch of those other coaches weren't as bad as we thought, because it seems like to me the offense is where all the issues were and still lie. Not all of them, but I believe more so if you can blame one unit if you can blame one unit for more, you have to blame the offense more, because the defense, while they weren't great, they were on the field a whole bunch because the offense couldn't sustain drives, didn't score enough points, and it put too much pressure on the defense. Whereas, as opposed, I don't think the offense can say that, because, well, they never really played well unless they were playing a really, really bad team. So I do believe the new additions are better. I think the environment will be better. I think it's more intentional. I think they know exactly what they want. They're not throwing stuff against the wall, trying to see what sticks. They're going to be very, very deliberate about how they move. They have been so far. I was listening to Liam Cohen on his press conference down at the owners' meeting just today. They sound like they know exactly what they want to accomplish in the draft, the type of player they want. They have a good idea. They're having ongoing discussions about players. So we were all wondering if this three-pronged approach to the NFL draft and personnel decisions was going to work. So far, so good. So what needs to happen for them to actually do what I think they can? I'll go through it one by one and tell you how I think the Jaguars can actually get to double-digit wins. We'll do it in just a second here on Locked On Jaguars. If you wonder how the Jacksonville Jaguars can get to double-digit wins, well, I think I'll talk to you about it and tell you. Nothing negative. We're not going to talk about anything negative. We're not going to talk about what can't happen. We're going to talk about what has to happen, right? We're not going to say don't fumble. We're going to say protect the football. That's just what we're going to do here in terms of positivity. The first thing that has to happen is the offensive line has to be at worst a 7.5 out of 10. Ironically, that's 7.5. That's the games, but they have to at worst. That's the number of games that's the over under. But I think 7.5 means that you are somewhere in the top 15, somewhere between 10 and 15 in terms of offensive line play. Now, if they draft somebody and that person comes in and he's an instant success, or they have competition and somebody beats out somebody, or Walker Little and Anton Harrison take a nice jump because of new coaching and a new scheme, then that would mean, in my opinion, that they will make a substantial jump in a substantial improvement and have one of the top 10 lines. You know, there's only 14 playoff teams. So that's why I say most of the teams that make it to the playoffs, at least, either have a good offensive line, better than average offensive line. In the case of the Bengals, that's not the case. But what the Bengals did have is the Bengals have dudes that can score a whole bunch of points and coaches who have been there and a mentality. So I think the Jaguars can get it done. I really, really do. That's the first thing I always look for with a team. The second thing is a stout defensive line. Liam talked about, Coach Cohen talked this morning about how they have 3 first-round picks on their defensive line. And he says, for now, which means the possibility that they'll take another one in the first round is real. He expects all of those guys to improve and grow better and be better. And by the way, I hope that, along with what Brian Sexton from Jaguars.com, good friend of ours, I hope y'all understand Trayvon Walker ain't going anywhere. I hope all of that stuff. I still see every day I look on here and I see somebody coming up with a trade scenario where they trade for Trayvon Walker and they send the Jaguars a pair of headphones, an ink pen, and a half-eaten Oreo cookie and think that the Jaguars are actually going to trade a dude that has almost 21 sacks the last 2 years for nothing. They're crazy. Don't be reading it. And that's a good way to separate the amateurs in this business from the people that really, really understand it. I think sometimes, though, in this business, people don't care whether something is true or not. They just do it for clickbait. And I got to the point where I even stopped clicking on the stuff. I'm like, I'm not helping them because I know what they're trying to do. Nobody is trading Trayvon Walker, especially for what those people suggest that we could get for Trayvon Walker. Nobody. Okay? It's impossible. It's not going to happen. All right. Defensive line, I think they have to improve. I'm not necessarily talking about sack numbers. I am talking about performance and their impact on the game, all game. They've had their moments over the last couple of years, but I'm talking about all game, in game. The defensive backs. If I talk to fans outside of offensive line, the defensive back is, aside from the few people that don't think Trevor's very good, the defensive backs, in my opinion, is probably, when you talk to the fans, the biggest area of concern. It's not for me. It isn't. When they got Jordan Lewis, I was like, man, that's a pro's pro. And then I did more research up on Eric Murray, who I knew a little bit. And they got done, they're going to keep Darnell Savage. I don't know what folks want to do. They got Savage and Murray in free agency, right? And then, and something I told people, if you want to go back to 2016, that offseason between 16 and 17, something I mentioned to people was when they went and got Barry Church, and then when they went and got, who's the other guy? They just signed him last year, but he never played. Tayshaun Gibson. I said, they may go out and get leaders and inject something. And if you recall the show, I can't remember which one it was, but I said they may go and get guys just like that. Guys who are at the point in their careers where Barry Church and Tayshaun Gibson were at that time. I think they were both in their late 20s. And they came in here as like 8-year veterans, and they solidified Jacksonville. That's exactly what they did. Although it's not 2 safeties, it's a slot who can play outside, and it's a very, very active safety who knows how to get his hands on balls, and he's very active. And both of these guys are really, really pesky. So they kind of did exactly what I thought they were going to do, and they went not super, super expensive with the Trayvon Merricks and the Javon Hollins of the world, but with real talent evaluation, got down to it and made like scouts choices and handpicked the guys that they wanted. And I think it's brilliant. I really do believe that they've done a really, really good job. I like the activity level that it seems like the body types in the secondary we're going to have. And look, I don't think they're done. I think they may go out and add something, if not day 2, at least early day 3, around that 4th round, and get some more bodies in here. The Jags in the past have either gone 2nd or 3rd round. And if they didn't go 2nd or 3rd round with the DBs, they waited to like round 6 or 7. And I think that was a Trent thing. I think that was his roadmap to it. I really don't believe that that's the way these folks are going to operate, and I hope not. So those are the main 3 areas that I'm thinking. Now, Trayvon, yes, needs to take another step, and I think he will. They need to find out who is a permanent running mate with Foyola Wakan, at least for this season. Is it going to be Devin Lloyd? Is it going to be Chad Muma? Is it going to be Ventrell Miller? Or is it going to be somebody in the draft? We've had that discussion, if they end up with Abdul Carter, that they'll play him at off-ball linebacker, stack linebacker first, and then allow him to rush the passer, similar to Micah Parsons. So I do believe that they have a lot of options to be able to get that done. So that's the defensive line, that's the back end, the middle, the offensive line. Now we'll get to Trevor and the skill position players. Hopefully, just by design, if the offensive line is where I've already thought it might be, hopefully by design, guys are able to use their natural ability, their instincts to play football, and they'll get more room to run this year. The receivers will get more room to catch and run this year by design. And now when you add Diami Brown and whoever else they may add in the draft, along with the two running backs who must protect the football. Shout out to my man Sam for making me emphasize that point more. I think they've taken a little bit off of Trevor by being a team that believes no matter who your quarterback is, you have to be able to move people and be able to run the football, especially in the red zone. I am so sick of the Jaguars getting inside of the 5-yard line on first down and not being able to punch that thing in 3 or even 4 shots at the goal line, and then have to end up throwing something outside to try to outflank somebody and then losing 3 yards and being back at the 8-yard line. I'm just sick of those days. At some point, they got to know you're coming, and you got to not care that they know you're coming, and you got to be able to bust them in the mouth. So it all goes back to the offensive line. 28 to 30 attempts for Trevor, still letting him show how big that arm is, but mainly just designing plays. Go back and watch Tampa last year. Just designing plays that are simple, where guys are just open. They can catch the ball and create something one-on-one, make a guy miss and continue to get first downs. I just think that the way Liam Cohen calls plays, it is just going to call for, shout out to Hank Stram, but it's just going to call for matriculation. And the big plays will come from the individual ability of the players with their hands on the football. Yep, that's what needs to happen. And I think the Jaguars can get the double-digit wins. We'll see what they do in the draft and all of that stuff to see if that can come true. You guys make sure when you start looking at the draft and talking about the draft that you tap into Locked On NFL Draft with Damian Parsons and Coach Keith Sanchez. Of course, Coach Keith Sanchez has been both him and Dame have been friends of the show. They are together, man, on the Locked On NFL Draft podcast, and you ain't going to get it any better than that. Make sure you tap into that each and every day wherever you get your podcast. As always, I appreciate you taking these 28 to 30 minutes out of your time to spend with me here on Locked On Jaguars. Come on back tomorrow, man, and make yourself an everydayer. Thank you for joining us again. We'll see you later.